Savvy Business Radio, drawing out the best from our guests with our host, Christina Nichman.
Our guests today are Brian M. Harman and Stephanie Taglianetti, sharing their very insightful book, Learn, Laugh, Lead: How to Avoid a Huge Leadership. In today's show, we discuss how to build better communication skills and leadership. Find out more and get your copy today of Learn, Laugh, Lead at bmhallmark.com. Hi, Brian. Hi, Stephanie. Welcome to Savvy Business Radio. How are you today?
We're excited to be
never
here.
Better. Hi, Christina. Yeah, we're doing great. Thanks for having us.
Oh my gosh. God bless you both. Well, I'm so excited to have you here. When I saw that your PR agents sent me over your book, I looked at the title and said, okay, before I even know what it is, I need to have you on. And it's so in line, it's so in line with what we do here on Savvy, which is experts sharing their wisdom and their stories to teach others. And the name of your book is Learn, Laugh, Lead: How to Avoid a Huge Leadership. And we've all been in times where, even if we are a good leader, we're of times where we're not as great a leader, and we'll work with people who are not all that great in leadership. But today you're going to share your lessons learned, and you come to know what is a good leader and what makes not such a good leader. But before we go to sharing all those wonderful tidbits, share with the audience a little bit about your backstory and how you came to creating your awesome book, Learn, Laugh, Lead. I'll start with you, Brian.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Christina. Wonderful introduction. It's good to hear your voice as I'm a fan of your podcast. So thank you. And I'm happy to share how this all came to be. So Stephanie and I are actually cousins. Oh. Although we live on opposite sides of the country now, we did both go to graduate school in Los Angeles. And a few years back, when we were coming towards graduation, we started to talk more about what's in our future, what's next on the career path, how are we going to make our mark on the world. So all of those things, I think a lot of people think about that as they're finishing up school. Mm-hmm. And we're both in teaching roles alongside with different corporate roles. We get into this leadership discussion about good bosses and bad bosses. It became this thing where we started to ask all our friends, the majority of those, though, kept coming back to us with horror stories about bad bosses.
Yeah.
So we, as young leaders out in our field trying to make a difference in the world, thought, you know what? We want to make a difference by writing something that's funny, something that uses what we consider to be good practices with sharing what we've learned. I've since started a PhD in global leadership and change, and through this last couple of years, we've just interviewed some of the world's greatest entrepreneurs. We've interviewed college presidents. We've interviewed executives. Through that process, we feel like we've put together a pretty solid 80 to 90 pages of something you can read about storytelling and leadership in just an hour or so.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And tell me, how was it for you that you came to this journey, Stephanie?
So Brian and I have worked together on other projects, and Brian sort of touched on this a little bit in what he just said. But so I come from a writing practice. I went to grad school and got my master's in writing. So Brian has always sort of taught me out with help in writing. And some of our conversations were also about the textbooks that he was reading while he was studying global leadership, and how those textbooks were really stale and hard to digest and translate into everyday life. So I always say that Brian and I have this left brain, right brain approach. Brian comes from like the business logic standpoint, and I'm from the creative artistic standpoint. And so the two of us teamed together to write this comedic and, most importantly, accessible, digestible leadership development textbook that's hopefully enjoyable to read along the way.
Oh, it most certainly has. I have not read all of it, as I stated at the beginning of the interview, but what I have read so far has really brought home, and you're going to share with the audience how you're able to teach so effortlessly and what you use, some of the key points, one of them being storytelling. That's really a good way for people to get the topic you're trying to teach and get it inside of you. I find even I've taken flying lessons, and one of the ways that one of my best flying teachers got me to understand topics is using stories, and also getting me out of my fear by using stories, by, yeah, and humor, which is another one that you guys use. What have you found, both of you, working in leadership and in the business world, makes a bad boss? Like, what is some of the key points that you found that bosses or leaders are not great? Why? And what is some of those key reasons?
Yeah, so the first one right off the bat is they tend to talk more than they listen. So Stephanie and I have a consulting practice called Business Management Hallmark, and within that practice, we work with clients that are trying to figure out what's the narrative of their company, and how can the leaders of that company better communicate that through storytelling on a daily basis. And the leaders that I would consider bad leaders are the ones who are not using every opportunity, interaction, encounter to push optimism and whatever that narrative is to the rest of the people that either they lead or work with.
By narrative, do you mean the story or the vision of that particular company?
Yeah. So if I work at a biotechnology pharmaceutical firm, I should always remember the narrative of what I'm doing is I'm there to save lives. Whether I'm an accountant, a finance guy, in manufacturing, research and development, or have a microscope in my hand, my purpose is to save lives. If I'm not communicating that message as a leader to my teams at all times, the purpose and alignment of that purpose, then what are we doing? We're just nerds in a lab.
No, I get you.
Yeah. And I think what Brian is saying is right on. You need to be able to communicate the story, vision, and purpose in every presentation. And just to piggyback off of Brian, I think another bad thing is that people don't prepare enough for meetings and presentations, and they rely too heavily on maybe like a PowerPoint that doesn't string through a narrative. And I think preparing your stories for the moments of influence that you have with people will allow you to have a more real and vulnerable and emotional connection that will be much more lasting with your team.
I love that point. I've been in so many presentations and meetings and corporate events where I just feel the person's kind of up there for themselves, and they're not right with me. And I kind of almost feel like it's almost an ego trip. And do stories help you? Are stories kind of like the pinnacle to help you connect with other people and share that vision and direction? How do stories help you?
Yeah, the stories could transform a discussion about data into a work of art that connects our hearts. That's the key there, is connecting our hearts, using open body language during a presentation, making eye contact, driving home a narrative. And I think Stephanie, I'd like to kind of ask her to sort of describe more of that emotional side of it.
Cool. So I think what's really important is the willingness to be open, honest, and vulnerable, and not afraid to be personal. And so Brian and I have developed this workshop for folks to develop their own personal and vision statements. Because if you think about conversations that you have with people that you're meeting for the first time, our initial tendency is often to rattle off where we're from, what we have our degrees in, what we do for work, that you're not really, it's forgettable. And so we have this workshop that helps people develop their personal story and communicate things that they know about themselves, but maybe don't always share, but shouldn't be afraid to. Brian, do you actually want to talk a little bit more about how our workshop works for that?
Yeah. So one, Christina, I'd love to tell you about is recently we were down in Lima, Peru, teaching storytelling for leaders at a Universidad ISAN. And this is a group of graduate students that are about to embark on the world to go and make their impact. So during the week, it was an intensive week-long workshop. Most of these people are either medical doctors or advanced engineers coming back to now learn the business trade and become leaders within their organizations. So they come to class, and we start off by really on an impromptu basis saying, tell me your story of the world. Totally ambiguous. And they can start with, ancient Incan civilization, because it was in Peru,
Yeah.
or they can talk about their childhood, or they can talk about all of the above.
Okay.
But most people did revert back to that surface level banter. And through the week, we moved away from that into the really deep conversation.
I love that you're going here, because one thing I gathered many years ago, I was hired into a managerial position. It was a little scary for me. But the first thing that was hardest for me is to dull out instructions or, have my crew do what was necessary. And I kind of felt like, could you do this? And I didn't come from confidence at the moment, but I also kind of felt that I couldn't reveal my vulnerabilities, that I would lose respect from the people that I was leading. And over time, I began to realize that it was actually the opposite, that by actually opening up, if I made a mistake and our whole team and crew went out to do something, we didn't accomplish it, instead of blaming the entire department, I blamed myself. And I stood before them and I said, you know what, I realized, guys, that I did not put a good plan in action. I take full responsibility, but we're going to kick butt next time. And I appreciate all your hard work. And I think within 6 months, we had a really nice kind of deep connection with each other. And my friend told me it's really because you opened up and allowed yourself to be vulnerable as a leader and to really tell the truth when you didn't do your best.
Yeah. And it's funny how vulnerability is often seen as a sign of weakness, but it's really not. It's a form of honesty and being fully human. And that's what we want. We don't want a robotic boss. We want a human boss that we can connect with.
And I think also what it shows people is that I'm willing to take responsibility and also have your back. So hey, listen, if I mess up as a leader, and I'm willing to come forward and tell you guys, hey, I messed up, but we're going to go forward, and I'm not doing that. But really, I'm actually going to ask you to hold you to the same standard that you actually lived your best and do your best just as I'm doing.
Exactly.
By example. Yeah.
Yeah. And Christina, I'd love to share a story with you. The CEO for a company that I've worked with, his name is JJ Biename. He's just French origin, but he came to the United States and he's the CEO of a company called BioMarin Pharmaceutical. And my best professional moment in my entire career, hands down, was watching him cry his eyes out on stage while he was happy to announce the approval of a new drug that was going to save children's lives. Those are the types of moments that have totally made an impact on me in my career. And if I look back at the other moments that are up there on that list, they're never like a big machismo, I'm so great with my ego type thing. No, it's not that. It's the vulnerable moments that we remember. It's the ones that we relate to, and it's the ones we cherish for the rest of our lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you mentioned something early on, both of you, the importance of a good leader listening. And you mentioned in your book how a lot of leaders are actually talking so much and don't shut up. So explain why that is and how do they accomplish being a good listener? And why are maybe a lot of leaders not good listeners?
Yeah, Stephanie, why don't we go medieval on this one? Could you elaborate?
Yeah, so in our book, we start off with listening in medieval times because knights their helmets would cover their ears to protect their ears, because listening to stories was regarded as an act of love and honor and respect. And what I think that we can take from this is listening is learning. And if you're not listening, you're not learning. And we often learn from the best leaders to become the best leaders. And Brian always says we sort of make a playlist of, skills and techniques and ways to lead that we like, that we can implement into our own leadership tool belt. So I really think that learning is at the root of listening.
That is so
Brian,
true. Yeah, and also, there's a really funny story in the book towards the end about one of the college presidents that we interviewed. And I call him the ring-leading lip leader from higher education because I've learned a lot from this guy. But when I first met him, I'll never forget how I felt. He was staring at my lips and my eyes like as if he had a hearing issue. And I was so confused by what he was doing that I kind of stopped and said, hey, can you hear me okay? Do I need to talk louder? I thought maybe one of his ears was bad.
Yeah.
And he said, no, I'm just trying to absorb every word you're saying. This is really interesting stuff. And instead of jumping in to talk about his agenda or who he was or his introduction, he kept asking me these elaborative questions. So can you expand on this? Can I hear more about this? What's your goal here? And so a lot of the lessons in the book come from people like that who have totally changed our ideas about what it is to be a good leader.
Ooh. Mm-hmm. Wow. And what's your take on it, Stephanie?
About listening?
Yeah. Where have you seen great listeners and leadership in that way?
Yeah, and then another thing that I always think about is communicating. And if we're not having fluid conversations that are back and forth, that's because we're not really listening. We just want to talk and we want to tell our story, but we're not really interested in the other side of the conversation. So I think that's important too, like really listening and communicating with people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think also, Christina, in your last podcast, I would encourage your audience to go back an episode and listen to the Science of Love, because I know that was touched on in that episode as well. And it works in the context of love and the context of business. Mm-hmm. So I just want to emphasize that. And I really enjoyed that episode, by the way.
Aw, thank you so much, Brian. It's true. And I love that you mentioned learning through listening. And it's so true. I mean, one of the things I just went to a sales training earlier this week. And one of the things, the key points that I picked up, and, sometimes we know this stuff, we have to hear it again just to bring it home. And he said, one of the things that really gets salespeople in trouble is they just walk in there and saying, my product, it's awesome, buy today. Ah! Like, okay. How about you listen to the person you have in front of you and see what their needs are? And he really came from the standpoint, listen, ask questions. And yeah, totally. It doesn't matter who you're talking to either. It could be a 5-year-old. They could teach you something.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, there's a game that I like to play in when I'm teaching grad school classes, and typically the first day of class, especially if it's a negotiation class, what I'll do is I just sit there at the front of the room and I wait for someone to say something, and I test that and figure out how long does that awkwardness have to be in the room before someone talks. And it's interesting to see the exercise doesn't go very long. It might last for less than 30 seconds. And that's because people aren't accustomed to just listening. So that's a good silence game test if you ever want to see how dedicated people are to listening.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that sometimes there's something to be learned or heard in silence. That with the person standing there before you, because I had gone many years ago to psychotherapy, and it used to drive me crazy that my psychotherapist would just sit there after he asked me a question and just wait. I'm like, can you talk now? I'm done. I'm uncomfortable. Yeah. Why do you think that is, though, that people are uncomfortable with silence?
I think that people just are so used to constant noise that they feel like they need to fill it themselves. But I always embrace silence because it's nice, because you can just relax, have a moment to enjoy each other's presence. And you don't need to force fillers, because it's artificial, I think, at that point.
Yeah. How much do you think of this modern world that is so fast paced, maybe with modern technologies and stuff, play a part in all of that and keeping us wanting to fill the space?
Oh, huge.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate because even those companies, the technology companies, they're fighting for our attention to not keep us quiet. And they call it, there was a term that someone coined recently called the attention economy.
Ooh.
And it just kind of kills that even more, because we're constantly trying to multitask between all these different things, when it's nice to go back to those fundamental approaches like the Pomodoro technique, where you are only focused on one thing. And if you're speaking with someone, that one thing should be that person.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, like, even when we are like physically being quiet, our minds are not quiet. If we're like on our phones scrolling through Facebook and Instagram, like we're still going. And that's not silence either.
Yeah. Guys, I am so anti-texter. People who know, listen to my show. I go out with my friend and they pull out the phone. I'm like, I'm looking at them like dead eyes, like, put that phone down, put it down.
No, I'm the same way. I like to leave it somewhere, like a bag zipped away, away from, I want to connect with the people I'm with.
I know. It's like we only have a short time with your friends. You're working, you have kids. It's like, let's just enjoy our time together. And you mentioned that in your book, how important it is that in the old days, before TV and internet and texters and all this stuff, that people really used to connect by storytelling. They used to really share each other's ideas and things they were excited about and their beliefs all through storytelling. Share a little bit about
that's how our whole species evolved.
Stephanie and I often debate about the difference between stories in movies and stories in business. It is a thing that we probably don't look at too much, but if you think about movies and the narrative in recent movies like Wonder Woman and Rogue One and these powerful female characters, as someone, actually both Stephanie and I have single mothers. And, we come to really respect that narrative that's in movies because those narratives shape our society. So in business, the stories that are told inside the office become the culture of that workplace. And the stories can also do one other thing that movies don't do. In business, the first one is the stories can evolve because they're not just on a piece of film that's stuck there in time and you can rewatch it, the same story multiple times. So they can evolve. They can change as the company develops or as the people develop. But also the business story can turn into something using that narrative that we talked about to drive inspiration or action or instruction of some kind. Through research, this isn't my opinion, but through research, many people who study storytelling have found that structure matters a lot more than content. And that's something we also want to focus on when we tell those business stories, because the PowerPoint can now become that story. So if you picture a triangle in front of you with the point facing straight upwards, the left side of the triangle at the bottom would be the setting and the context. Then that uphill towards the point would be the climax. But on that uphill, what we do there is we create a problem, or not create a problem, but we talk about a problem. We talk about a struggle. We build tension. What this does is it increases our cortisol levels so that our focus then becomes tunnel visioned into this very, very specific climactic moment that we have. That would be at the middle of your PowerPoint deck, for example. After you hit the climax, the exciting moment, then you can come back down the other side of the triangle with some confirming statements, some good examples of what's happening. And then finally you get to that bottom right side of the triangle, which is the call to action or inspiration or instruction. That thing that people can clearly walk away from now that their cortisol levels have started to fall again. They're ready for the closing. You give them that call to action, and then everyone can leave there with that piece.
The takeaway.
Yeah, the takeaway. Now, how many businesses have you worked with, Stephanie and Brian, where you felt that, you've talked to them, and I've heard this from business myself, we don't really have a narrative. We don't really have stories or a culture. I'm like, well, I think you do. Maybe you're not in tune with it. Have you come to, businesses that have told you the same thing where they don't really feel that they have a clear story?
Yeah, actually, most of them don't have a story. So we've worked with hundreds of people that just get this really reinvigorated sense of life back into the business when they can find that narrative and connect with it. So one example I tell in the graduate school classes I teach is, does anybody know the founding story of Nike? And most people say, no, I have no idea. And then I say, how many people are wearing Nikes? And half the class will raise their hand. Either they're wearing them or they have them. So why are we buying these products if we don't even know what their story is?
Right.
And why isn't Nike communicating that story? Because it's a fascinating one. And I think they used to tell it, but they're not telling it enough anymore.
Wow. Now I want to hear the story.
The Nike story.
Oh, yeah. So the Nike story, do you know the Nike is a god?
No, I didn't know that. A Greek god.
Yeah. So Yeah, Nike is the Greek god of victory.
Wow. I didn't know. Huh.
When the founder was traveling and went to the temple of Nike, that's when they changed their name. They had some really lame name before, like Blue Star Shoes or something. And at that moment of clarity, they discovered that they wanted their athletes to be victorious. They wanted their name to be associated with victory, but nobody knows that. We love their slogan, though, the Just Do It slogan.
Yes.
Right.
So they can get back to that victory thing. And I'm actually wearing Nikes right now. So,
but you know the story.
The victory today.
But you know what's interesting, guys? You know what's interesting for me? Some of my favorite products, I might not know the backstory, but there's an emotional pull that comes from that product that makes me want to wear it or be around it or have it in my life. So I might not know the very story, but Nike is not a shoe I actually have owned. But there's other products that I just want in my life, and it's that inspirational, emotional component. I don't know how they put it forth. Maybe it's in the commercials. Maybe it's the way I feel.
It's very smart marketing. I mean, marketing is all about telling stories too, and that's what I do in PR is I help companies establish an emotional connection by either telling a success story with a client when I was working in telehealth and really honing in on that. Brian has examples as well working at BioMarin. But yeah, the best marketing is telling emotional stories and making people like you have emotional connections to a product.
Yeah. And what I think is the most amazing ones, guys, is when you don't even know why you feel that emotional pull. It's like the message is so good, you don't even know why you love it, but you do.
Yeah, I mean, I really love the Perrier water, but they in all of their people just look so refreshed when they're drinking it.
Yeah,
and I think sometimes there's just the physical response to things, but yeah, I even myself, I'd love to know some of that story behind my favorite water.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talked about Nike, one of the things that has been emotional pull for me, I'm not desired because I'm not much of a sports gal. And recently I'm going to the gym, but still I don't wear a lot of sports gear. But I've always loved that just do it. And it's become one of my mottos over the year in business because we often sit in an idea and think, oh, let me just get things together and make sure it's structured enough before I move, read enough books, take enough classes. And then sometimes you just gotta just do it. Yeah, to move forward and to just do it and then make cross correction. So it's become one of my favorite sayings, even though I don't wear their shoes.
Yeah, I mean, and what
have you seen the video by Shia LaBeouf?
No.
Oh, it is so funny. He starts screaming, "Just do it," over and over and over again. It's the most motivational speech I've ever seen in my life.
Really? Just do it.
Yeah, you'll have to find it. It's on YouTube everywhere.
Wow. Well, I mean, that's sometimes what it comes down to for a business owner or even whatever you're doing. I think sometimes we get in our own way because we're always like setting up these kind of roadblocks of what we think we might need or what we need to put in order before we move forward. And sometimes it's like, just move forward and cross correct as you get going.
Yeah, just do it.
Yeah, just do it. Now, what have you found, guys, both of you mentioned in your book, and I found it also very important, is attitude. Sometimes what gets in the way of a leader, a great leader, or a successful business is that attitude behind it. How does attitude play a part in your success as a business owner?
So for us, we tend to adhere to the principles of Daniel Goleman and emotional intelligence. So what we find to be really helpful for us is within what he calls it the 4 dimensions of leadership. And the first 2 dimensions are about personal confidence. So you have to have your self-awareness, which is, in my mind, the biggest key to change and developing as a leader. And then the second part of personal confidence is self-management. How do you hold yourself? How do you live in the moment? How do you show up? Mm-hmm. The second part of the dimensions are the social side of things. And what he says, I believe the third is, instead of self-awareness, now we're in social awareness. So this is around service and empathy towards others. Mm. And the most important one is the 4th dimension. It is relationship management. So that part is the influence, the inspiration, being able to spot the different emotions and adapt your leadership style to the moment in need. So I think those are really the way that we feel about leadership for ourselves and for how we deal with others.
Yeah. And also what in regards to attitude, what we talk about in the book a lot too is everything that is within our own self-control, including our attitude and the ability to laugh, how we optimize how we spend our time. That's a huge compartment in the book, especially humor.
Yeah, I mean, it can help you get through some really difficult times. Realizing, lighten up, it's not that big. It can get, it's sometimes some of the things I look back on, I was so upset about XYZ, and you realize it wasn't that big of a difference. And on the other take to that, when we did something big, we started this new series 2 years ago where we were going to do live networking events in Manhattan. I was really, really scared. I'd never done it, but sometimes you build up all this fear where really, once you do it, you're like, hey, it's not as bad as I thought it was. And you can realize, hey, it was just more of a build up inside of me, and lighten up, enjoy the process.
Totally.
Yeah, there's the people that I really tend to follow to get a good hold of that part of my life is obviously Tony Robbins, Tim Ferriss, the books from Stephen Covey. Those are really good at helping you to shape how you generate optimism in every specific moment so that you aren't stuck in this pattern of fear. Or one of the things, I can't remember where I got this, but I came across it and it's been stuck with me ever since, is the universe doesn't care about you. You and me, and the universe does not care. If you look up at the stars, does the universe care that we just got ketchup on our shirt? No.
No.
It's like, it's okay to relax. It's okay to do any of that. But what is in our control is our opinion of ourselves, our pride in ourselves, our attitude. Are we the complaining type? Because you can control whether you complain or not. Yes, and if it's in your control, then you shouldn't let that be something that puts out negative energy to the world. And that,
because you can control and change that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the universe.
Absolutely. It's been so awesome having you both share today. Let everyone know where they can get a copy of your book, Learn, Laugh, Lead. Where can they get a copy and find out more about both of you?
Yeah, we have our website is bmhallmark.com. That stands for Business Management Hallmark. The word hallmark is the fact that Stephanie and I put our personal stamp of approval on everything that we do. Every call that we have with a client, every workshop that we do is really from the heart. So bmhallmark.com is where you can find out more about us. We have some free webinars coming up with the key takeaways from the book. So that would be exciting for the audience. Our actual hard copy and ebook copy are available on Amazon. If you just type in Learn, Laugh, Lead, it will come up. The other thing I would hope to do here is maybe there's a chance that we might get some reviews there, because right now it's Stephanie's mom and my mom and a couple of our friends.
Which we do appreciate.
Yeah. And I've gathered so much from what I've read so far. And for me, one of the greatest learning takeaways in all my life is connecting with people and hearing their stories. And you have a lot of stories, a lot of learning and lessons in your book that I know can benefit anyone, whether you're a business owner, a mom, or even a student. And anyone can gain something from your wonderful book. So everyone, please go get a copy of Learn, Laugh, and Lead today. And thank you so much, Brian and Stephanie, for coming to share your great wisdom today on Savvy Business Radio.
Thank you, Christina. It was wonderful chatting with you.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank
Christina.
you, guys.
It was a privilege. Thank you.
You betcha.
Savvy Business Radio broadcasts worldwide via a large podcast network, celebrating business owners, entrepreneurs, influencers, and successful individuals. Find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or how to become a guest. Call 732-474-7375 or email Christina@savvybusinessradio.com.